times in life things go smoothly. We feel loved, people are getting along, it all seems to flow. And then there are the other times when we find ourselves feeling like we're on the outside. Maybe we spoke our minds in a way people didn't like. Maybe we just don't fit in. Sometimes we're physically unwell and can't be with other people for a while. These moments can feel extremely lonely, but they happen to everyone, including one of the greatest leaders in the Torah, Miriam. My name is Alicia Jo Rabins, and I'm the creator of Girls in Trouble, an indie folk song cycle about biblical women. I work in two worlds, as a musician and as a Torah teacher. In graduate school, I was studying stories of biblical women. I loved the power in these women's stories and how their complicated lives seemed to echo my own. So I started writing songs about them, and I just never stopped. Now, after 15 years of singing and teaching about biblical women with Girls in Trouble all across the country, I want to broaden the conversation. So along with my director, also named Alicia, we're setting out on this journey through the stories of women in Torah and the great interpretive tradition of Judaism. We'll visit biblical women, and we'll travel to talk with contemporary Jews who are doing fascinating work reinterpreting our tradition. Rabbis and chefs and herbalists and Torah scribes and scholars. Together we'll ask, how can these women's stories help us understand who we are and who we might become? Judaism famously has a love of books and the written word, but we also have plenty of earth-based rituals and traditions. One of my favorites comes on Saturday evening as part of the Havdalah ceremony, which marks the end of Shabbat, our Sabbath. As part of Havdalah, we say a blessing and breathe in the scent of herbs. This little bit of sensory pleasure helps us transition from sacred time back to regular time. So today, I'm gathering some herbs from my garden to dry for Havdalah. We let these beautiful herbs dry for a few days. Now I'm going to tell you the story of Miriam while I refill this violin-shaped Havdalah spice container. Miriam is the big sister of Moses, but she's also a leader in her own right. The Torah calls her a neviah, a prophet. Miriam has had a special connection to water her whole life, and she's also always been brave. As a girl, she watches over baby Moses in his basket of reeds, risking her own life to keep her little brother safe. At the Exodus, after crossing the sea, she leads all the Israelite women in a song of praise. And according to tradition, she has the magical power of finding water in the desert, making sure the Israelites can survive as they wander. Often when we talk about Miriam, we celebrate all these wonderful parts of her story, and that is as it should be. But there's also a certain imbalance in only focusing on the great part of someone's life and not giving some loving attention to their challenges too. So today we're going to explore a moment that happens later in Miriam's life, something very challenging that raises a lot of questions, when, after all these years of service to the community, there is a swerve in Miriam's story. One day, while the people are still wandering in the desert, Miriam and her brother Aaron decide to approach God with some questions. First, they bring up something related to Moses' wife. Then they challenge God about the power structure in their community. Why is Moses so much more important than them? God's response is anger. God strikes Miriam with leprosy, and the skin on her body turns white and scaly. But nothing happens to Aaron. When Moses sees Miriam in this state, he's shocked. He cries out this beautiful healing prayer. El na refa na la. Oh God, please heal her. And God responds in a pretty disturbing way, saying, if her father spit in her face, wouldn't she have to bear her shame for 7 days? Basically, I'll heal her, but first she has to be sent away out of camp alone for a week. So Miriam goes off to the desert, and when she comes back, she finds the people waiting for her. They've refused to move on without her. This is just one moment in Miriam's long story of leadership, and it's a moment we don't often talk about. But I think it's important to visit Miriam not only in her moments of celebration, but also this moment of difficulty, to keep Miriam company in the desert, and to think about how she might keep us company in our own moments of challenge. These themes of healing, plants, water, and women's leadership led us directly to the studio of contemporary Jewish herbalist, healer, and scholar Dori Midnight in Western Massachusetts. So can you tell us a little bit about what happens in this space?
I do intuitive healing work, and so that involves like working with plant medicine, with stones, doing rituals, reading things about ancient Jewish healing practices and protection rituals, just deeply listening to people and their ancestors and kind of like dreaming with the ancient towards like healing and liberation with different communities.
Is there a biblical woman story that particularly speaks to you in this moment or relates to your work?
I've been really going deep with Miriam. Through my exploration with Jewish healing traditions, Miriam is just invoked over and over again in salt rituals, in water rituals, in different healing and protective rituals. The more that I connected with her and studied with her and thought about her, the more complicated she's become for me, which I appreciate because I think a lot of what I learned was pretty flattened.
Can you tell me a little more about the complexity? What does Miriam hold for you?
Well, I think about her as the first female prophet and what that means. I think a traditional way of interpreting prophet is as an intermediary, right? And she's very much not that. So what does it mean that she is a prophet? She consistently challenges and speaks out. She somehow knows that liberation is possible, that liberation will happen, that something different is possible. Not just imagines that freedom is possible, but is I'm gonna do all of these steps to make sure freedom and liberation happen. So I'm gonna get in the way of things. She meddles and she's clever and really makes sure to preserve the life of her brother, who she knows is instrumental in this liberation. And then there's her moment at the sea. One of the roles of women prophets were that they were storytellers and singers, and that they sung in groups, and that they told stories and they carried tradition through singing. She was a prophet of the people and connected to the people. She's noticing a shift of here we are, we have this opportunity, we've just left empire. We've just left the most oppressive, top-down in slavery. Are we really gonna replicate those same structures amongst our people? Are you gonna become the one leader who has access to prophecy and tell everybody what to do, or are we going to do this differently? And then she gets, sent out, and the text has her punished by having scales on her skin, literally outside of the structure. So when these healing traditions invoke her, to me, that's what we're invoking. We're invoking thousands of years of traditions of people who weren't on the inside, who weren't writing the books. She's an archetype of resistance and defiance.
Now let's step from Dori's garden through my garden into the Torah hut for a deep dive into some more perspectives on Miriam. Torah hut moment. Miriam's name can be understood as the combination between two Hebrew words, mar, bitter, and yam, sea. Mar yam, the bitterness of the sea. This name points both to Miriam's connection with water and to the sense that something about her story is unfair. Perhaps most of all, that moment in the desert. To their credit, the rabbis do seem to notice how unfair it is that Miriam's punished and Aaron isn't when they've both approached God together. They address this by pointing out that when the Torah says that Miriam and Aaron spoke to God, the verb spoke is in the feminine, vatidaber Miriam va'aharon. If Aaron were also speaking, then the verb should have been conjugated differently. They suggest that maybe Miriam led the way in the complaint, which could justify why she was the only one to be punished. You can agree or disagree with this. In my opinion, it remains problematic that Aaron, who was also in the conversation, receives no consequences, while Miriam is punished so harshly. But I do appreciate that at least the rabbis seem uncomfortable with this situation. How many times in life does this sort of thing happen on a smaller level, where we speak up about something and are told, "You're overstepping"? Miriam and Aaron say, "Has God spoken only through Moses? Has God not spoken through us as well?" This story is difficult, but I appreciate that it isn't glossed over, that it's included in our sacred text. We all have moments of feeling like we're on the outside, even a prophet like Miriam. It can help us feel better knowing that even in the most difficult times, we are not alone. It's also important to remember the end of this story, which is beautiful. The people camp out right where they are and wait for Miriam. Even though she's been sent away by God for a week, the people refuse to move on until she rejoins them. Now that we've done a deep dive into this difficult moment in Miriam's life, let's zoom back out and ground ourselves in the visionary hope of her overall story. The story of a prophet, a leader, a liberator who's beloved by her people. Rabbi Zach Kamenetz is a modern mystic, seeker, and leader whose work focuses on embodied, integrated spiritual practice. I wanted to get his deep reading of Miriam the prophet. Is there a moment in the story of Miriam, biblically, that you respond to particularly strongly?
Yeah, there are two. And first is when Moshe's mother hides him in a basket to be sent off down the river. And just in a few scant lines, Miriam is presented as looking out. She is watching to see what will happen. And she doesn't look away. She is looking out to the future in the care of her brother. That kind of pregnant expectancy is something that I want to live my life through. Miriam is there looking out for me, and I should be looking out like her. And it then comes to fruition when the Jewish people cross the Red Sea. She has been prepared for this moment of liberation and joy. She packed her tambourines. She packed the timbrels. She knew that something great was going to transpire. She knew that liberation was going to happen. She had been watching it happen when Moshe was just a baby. And so those two things together, right? There's the watchfulness and the hopefulness and the knowledge that celebration will occur. Like that just, that melts me. That melts my skepticism. It melts my hard-heartedness. And I want to be able to hold those two things together and bring them to my daughter. And know that even in this downtrodden world, we don't look away from the brokenness, but we are waiting with hope and with faith for celebration and joy. It's really, really good.
Amen. Amen. Can you hear that song?
Yeah, amen.
Miriam is perhaps most famous for her song at the sea, and I didn't want to say goodbye to this character without first talking to one of our most beloved contemporary leaders in song, Ali Halpert. Here's Ali's own beautiful setting of Moses' healing prayer for Miriam, El Na Rafana La. We both have probably thought a lot about Miriam as another biblical woman who has this deep relationship and connection to song. So I just want to give you a little space to talk about how you relate to Miriam as a, keeper of song, leader of song, creator of song, and teller of stories.
I think one way that I resonate with Miriam is understanding song as this deeply needed spiritual resource for our people. Miriam was so clear that song was something that our people deeply needed to resource them. Whether we're crossing the Red Sea or whether we have just crossed it and we're facing this huge wilderness in front of us and don't know where we're going, or if it was a good idea to leave where we had just left, song is important every step of the way. And I feel like Miriam really understood that. And then to also have the bravery to still be in front of people and to still sing and to lead people in song. I think about that because there's a lot of times these days where I'm bedraggled and I'm also sad and heartbroken about what's going on in the world. And then just to be okay, Miriam could do it. Miriam still got up in front of her community, even though there was so much oppression that she was facing and that her people were facing. And so even if I can't figure out what it is that I need to say or what words there are to say, I can still get up and sing. Yeah, I think I take courage from Miriam.
I think to me, that's the moment where there's this split and there's the Mosaic tradition of text and the tradition of hierarchy and the tradition of the priesthood of him and Aaron. And then there's the Miriamic tradition, which is the traditions that exist outside, that exist on the margins, that exist in the wilds and exist by the water and exist in our bodies. I think about the traditions that sort of roll from her almost as tributaries of resistance, of collective liberation, of the way that she transmits her wisdom through song and through dance and through circles, rather than, I think, like the hierarchy that Moses brings. You know, she moves in circles, she dances in circles, she plays a circular instrument. And I think like her leadership is very circular. Her leadership is like a delta. And those tributaries that flow from her are like these women doing healing work in their kitchens.
So celebration and isolation, leadership and exile, and the beautiful raw materials of song and nature, which hold us throughout these ups and downs. Because after all, being in relationship means navigating times of togetherness and times of separateness or conflict. And although these moments can feel incredibly isolating, although it's never easy to feel like we're on the outside of the circle, the truth is that even then, we're not alone. We have Miriam to keep us company. We have plants and water and the rituals we create with them, the simple companionship of earth, and we always have song. Well, my mother named me bitter, although as a child I was so kind, hiding myself in the reeds to watch over my brother. But still my name was bitter, bitter the taste of the sea, bitter the cries of the horses drowning behind us. If anybody had asked me, I might not have chosen to go. But everyone knows sometimes you don't have a choice. So when he said you're banished, 7 days in the desert alone, I just started walking. I knew there was nothing to say. The scorpions and the spiders crawled up to me and stopped in my shade. Together in silence we watched as the sun crossed the sky. And I don't regret an hour of the week that I lived all alone at the top of the mountain. Though no voice came down from heaven, and I never saw words written in fire, I did see the birds of prey pick all the carcasses